Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the Executive Director of the Alliance Against Seclusion Restraint. I am also the host of the podcast. I actually wear a lot of different hats, but I'm excited to be here with you today. It is Thursday, January 23rd, and this is our second podcast of the new year. We are excited to be here. Have a lot we want to share in the coming year, so let's get moving. Those of you that might not know who we are and what we do, if this is your first time listening, welcome. We're excited to have you. A little bit about us. The Alliance Against Seclusion Restraint was formed about 6 years ago. We are on a mission. We are on a mission to really have a positive influence in changing policy practice, moving away from punitive exclusionary discipline and outdated behavioral management approaches, and moving people into better directions, having an influence to help stem the school to prison pipeline and ultimately support better outcomes for children, for teachers, for staff, and others. Of course, restraint and seclusion are one of the issues that got us here, and that is something that's important to us no matter where it may be happening, whether it's in a residential facility, a school, a hospital, all the places that these things often happen, very often when people don't know what else to do in the name of behavior or in concerning events. Excited today. As usual, we've got some great guests in store for you today. In fact, we were having such a vibrant conversation as the podcast was getting ready to start. You know, the podcast almost didn't start. We almost got carried away in a conversation. But I have Justin Moorman and Katie Thornton joining me today, who are two veteran educators, and they're going to be sharing some things with us. We're going to be having a great conversation. So stick around, and you're going to get to meet them in just a moment here. Before we do that, a couple of basic things I want to share with you. First of all, we do record this. So when we go live, and we go live because I don't like editing, but when we go live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can go back to any of those platforms after the fact, and you can watch the video there. You also have the option to download this as an audio-only podcast. So if you prefer to listen on your morning walk or listen in the car in your commute or whatever it may be, you have the option to go back and you can listen to it as an audio-only podcast. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcast, you can listen to it there. I do want to ask, if you are listening live right now, and I know a few of you are, if you're listening live, let us know in the comments, in the chat, who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun. And so just humor me here. It's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. I realize more and more every day that we have this global community of people that are out there and that are doing things that are making a positive difference. And we just had a conference recently. We had people from 12 countries. We had New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Canada, all over the world. And it's really nice to know that you've got a community of people that care about this and are out there doing better things. So again, in the chat, let us know who you are and where you're from if you would. I do want to just share with you a couple of quick announcements before we get to our guests. Not a whole lot here this afternoon, but a couple things. One, I mentioned that we had our conference this week. We had the Supporting All Brains conference earlier this week. It was on Monday. And that was a full day event, and it was a very full day. And we had some amazing speakers for that event. We had Dr. Lori Desautel, we had Andy Quirkus, we had Courtney Hart. We had just an amazing group of speakers for that event with a lot of, I think, really fantastic comments. And I guess the bad news is you missed it. The good news is you have a second chance. And the second chance is, although the live event is over, we have now the replay available. So with the replay, you can order the replay. It's only $29. And once you order it, you have access to not only the live event that you would have missed, but it's organized in a way that makes it easy to go through. And you have additional material. We actually built this in a way that when you get in there for each of the presentations, you have not only the presentation that happened on the live event day, you have a little bit about the presentation. You get to learn more about the author. You, of course,
super. Okay.
get the presentation, which I'll move away from. You get access to view the slides, some additional resources, even a survey in here. And when you complete it, there's a certificate you can get for completing the event. And in addition to the 8 live events that we did during that event, you also have access to 4 additional events that were recorded specifically for this conference, but were part of kind of bonus material that we were offering for this. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I was actually talking to Katie and Justin a moment ago before we came on here, and we're talking about how sharing this with others, sharing this with schools, and having people use it for professional development can be so powerful. Do also want to ask, if you are somebody that supports our work, we are a very small nonprofit. It is hard to survive as a very small nonprofit, so we need some support. And if you support our work, we're asking people to think about joining us. You have an option now to join the Alliance. If you go to our website, which is endseclusion.org, and Courtney will put that in the chat, and you go to take action, you have an option now to join the Alliance. And when you join the Alliance, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can join at a few different levels. We have a supporter level, advocate level, guardian level. We even have a sponsor level. So these levels like supporter, advocate, guardian, this might be for an individual or organization. The contribution is asking for $5, starting at $5 a month, up to 25 or 50. At a sponsor level, it's really intended more for an organization, but it could be a person or a business that's aligned. And if you become a sponsor, you'll actually get an ad on our podcast as well. So that's kind of fun. But anyway, for $5 a month, it can be a contribution that helps us continue to do this work. So I would ask that you consider that, how you might support our work, because it is important. And we're not able to do this if we're not able to fund the things that we're doing. So with that, let's get to why you are really here. You're not here necessarily just to hear me talk. And again, one more reminder, if you are listening live in the chat, let us know who you are and where you're from. So let me go ahead and bring our guest up and introduce them. I'm very excited. One of the things that's really interesting about having Justin and Katie with us today is that I've been on their podcast, which we're going to talk about. And it's fun when you get to kind of, switch the tables a little bit. Although I know Justin is dying to do an introduction, and we might do that anyway in here. Let me tell you a little bit about Justin and Katie. They are veteran educators who are very well versed in trauma-informed practices, with advanced training in the Neurosequential Model in education, which you've heard us talk about quite a bit, Dr. Perry's work, applied Educational Neuroscience, of course, Dr. Lori Desautel's, and I know graduates from that certificate program, crisis prevention intervention, restorative practices, treatment and education of autistic and related communication, the TEACCH program out of NC, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, and advanced collaborative proactive solutions as well, Dr. Ross Green's work. They believe kids do well if they can, and that ties in very well there, and problems should be solved with kids. Couldn't agree more with that. We often talk about kind of our four core principles here at the Alliance, and one of them is collaborative. It should be about doing things with people, not doing things to people or for people. So they certainly follow that collaborative approach. They look forward to sharing their passion with others, and they continue to help reform educational practices based on current research. Katie and Justin have launched a podcast called the Re-Education of Schools podcast. And I don't know, what episode count are you on now? I know you're moving along.
We're just over 50, 52.
52 just
52.
Launched on Monday. Yeah.
Wow. 52 episodes. So giving a voice to advocacy, to support, and professional development to other educators. So really important space here, important work. Listen, Katie and Justin, it is fantastic to have you here. I think so highly of you, the work that you're doing. I've loved being on your podcast. I know at the time, the last time I was on there, I was one of your first repeat guests, which was a lot of fun.
Yes.
So, maybe I'll get another slot one day if I have something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, we're hoping you to be the first 3-time guest, right?
There you go. That would be great.
We'll put it on the books this year.
Yeah,
for
you
sure.
gotta like put some ground between you and the other people so they can't catch you. That's what you gotta do.
That's right. Looking to take a lead.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's great to have you both here, and we have a couple of people that have joined us already, and I'll just share in the chat. We have Acorns with Whiskers, which is Andy, and Andy was one of the presenters at our recent Supporting Our Brains conference. And Katie, I know you were talking about attending. You might have seen Andy's presentation. Fantastic.
I did, and I thought it was, I learned so much, and that's one of the presentations I'm purposely going to purchase. The webinar is for to show my staff. I thought the PBIS and the behavioral model, Andy, well done. It was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Andy, I've heard a lot of positive comments about that. I also have I have a familiar name here, Lynn Stevens. Hi, guy, Lynn from Ocala. I'll let you make a relationship connection there, but I'll say that while not always on live, my mother's one of my biggest fans. So it's always good to have mom drop in on the podcast as well.
We know how that goes. There's lots of likes from our parents.
Yeah, Sherry and Kim are all on it. So
there you go.
It. Yeah,
that's great. So others, again, feel free to let us know who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat. And we will just kind of have a conversation. As I mentioned to you, just kind of over the next hour or so, we're going to have a conversation, talk about some things that I know that we're all pretty passionate about. And of course, I read a brief introduction to you both, but I happen to know that there's a lot more to each of you and your background. And, one of the things that I appreciate about all of this is it really is a journey. It's a journey in terms of, kind of, not only kind of getting an education and deciding what you want to do with your life, but, you're on a journey, and one that I can relate to, which is about doing better for kids, doing better for teachers and others that are working the field of education. It is a hard world out there in education right now. And, even the focus of your podcast, kind of, re-education, kind of looking at, how do we grow? How do we shift? How do we improve things? So what I'd like to do is give you each an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about kind of your story, kind of what brought you into the education field. And then, what was the spark that kind of led you down this pathway of kind of trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned approaches? So if I can, Katie, I can put you in the spot first, because
Sure.
Why not?
The right move. Yeah.
Yeah. Justin always knows the right thing to say. No, well, my background, I really started interesting. I went to school for early childhood education, accidentally was placed in a field placement in a structured autism preschool classroom. Never really been around folks with disabilities before, and absolutely fell in love working with children that had autism, and really changed my whole career path. I finished my degree in early childhood education and reading, and then went back and got my master's immediately in special education, and then started our first structured school age program for students with autism to support. This was, nearly 20 years ago this was happening, but started that training. I was really involved with like ABA school teams, because that was, Autism Speaks came out. I was on the board of directors of the Autism Society and an area autism organization, and doing a lot of PD and professional development. And I got my certification through TEACCH for structured teaching. Absolutely love that job. And I never realized a lot of things we talk about actually were the principles of neuroscience, like why I was able to co-regulate with a kid, and there was relational practices, and some of these kids coming in. I was a kindergarten, first grade teacher, so very young children who hadn't had any structured or school experiences. And how did we get them? How was I able to not use restraint or seclusion to get them to understand what I was saying using that communication and working with them? And a lot of it makes sense now because I know more about the brain. That was my favorite job I had out of all my paths that I had been down. Went and taught general education in first grade, working mostly with a lot of the kids with more significant behavioral needs in my Title I school. Found a love and a passion for that. COVID hit and I became a special education coordinator. I had a daughter at the time that was 3 and had some behavioral needs. And we were really investigating that. So I got into a lot of this work, really Ross Green's work, trying to figure out how to parent her. My traditional things that we had been raised doing was not really working. So doing that research with my husband and figuring out that we really started following Ross Green's book and his approach, and learning from her as from a parent's lens has been tremendously helpful, and having that empathy with other families. As we walked through that journey, through a special education coordinator, really got heavily involved in trauma-informed care, listening and following lots of podcasts and reading books and research, and just really diving into all that. Went and got Dr. Lori's Applied Educational Neuroscience certificate, came on to Stingley Elementary, and I've been the principal there. This is my 4th year, and really wanted to create a trauma-informed school, which led me to meeting Justin. When I was the coordinator, we were getting ready to hire a teacher for our behavioral mental health program. I knew very specifically what I was looking for. I wanted somebody that was trauma-informed, that aligned itself with my beliefs about children, and I knew the direction I wanted to take that program. So I'll let Justin kind of take it there to introduce himself, because I met him on a Zoom call. And I remember as we were screening people, one of my questions was, what podcasts do you listen to? What books do you read? And the rest was kind of history from there.
So you have to answer that question first. How did you answer that question?
Yeah. I said I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And
Yeah.
and I said And I said, I don't read a lot of education books. I think that's the two things I said. And then I said, but I did just recently go through, and I'm a part of, Bruce Perry's kind of advanced training. And I think by the time she heard Bruce Perry, I think she didn't care what else I said after that. She, which is good. I probably said a lot of crazy stuff after that she would have regretted hearing.
Yeah.
But no, that was it. That's how I said it.
So great to hear how you guys connected. Give us the walkthrough for you. I mean, how did you get to where you are and what you're doing, and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. I'll give you like the shortest version, or at least the abbreviated version for sure. I did not go to school for education. I had no plans on being a teacher. I had gone to school for something else, but by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I was not sure what I wanted to do. So kind of finished up my degree. Graduated, got engaged the summer after I graduated and was going to be getting married. Was looking for jobs, right? Couldn't find jobs over and over and over again. No matter what. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who've experienced this too. I either had too much education to get the job or not enough experience to get the job. And I was like, well, there's got to be a sweet spot in there somewhere. Like I can't like, you got to give me one of them. You got to give me one of them. And so I couldn't get a job, and it lasted until February. So, I graduated in the spring, and February rolled around. We were getting ready to get married. I still hadn't graduated. And I applied for a part-time custodian job in an office building and went in to interview. I know it was related to a school, but I didn't know in what way, and met with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. Was going through all the normal questions, and the superintendent stopped halfway through the questions, and he said, Justin, can I be honest? He goes, why are you here? He's like, you are a young guy. You seem like you're relatively sharp. You got a degree. Why are you applying for a part-time custodian job? So I told him why. And he's like, well, what are you wanting to do? And I said, oh, that's the problem. I don't know. I just know I want to help people. I want to do something where I can help people. And left that interview and called my soon-to-be wife and said, we were getting married that weekend. It was like a Tuesday. Called my wife, said they're not going to give me the job because I told them that I would 100% take a better job if I could, as soon as it came along. Like the first better job that comes, I said, for however long you got me, I'm going to work as hard as I can. So they called me before I even got home, offered me the job. Long story short, it was a separate facility. They ran a separate facility. It was like an educational service center in our area. I didn't know what that meant. I knew it worked with special education, but that was it. I had nothing to do with that. I just worked in an office building, cleaning, probably very poorly. I don't think I was a great custodian. And so I left there. I got another job about 2 months later. And as I was leaving, the assistant superintendent said, hey, would you be interested in a paraprofessional, like an aide position in our schools the following year? And I said, yeah, because the job I'm leaving for is, it's just for a season. It's just a summer job. And so he said, well, why don't you talk to HR on the way out? We'd love to have you. So I did. I talked to them, went and interviewed. A lot of crazy stuff happened throughout that. And while I was in that interview at the school was still in session, and I was walking around this school, and in my mind, I knew it was special education, and I had a very specific thought in mind of what that looked like. And I was being shown around classrooms that looked like typical students. And I didn't really understand that, but I pretended like I did because I was in an interview, and it seemed like I should just pretend like I understood. And long story, with a lot of people helping me out, I ended up being offered a job there as what they called a floating aide. So I was going in to specifically work with the students who were having the hardest time right then. And it was an interesting spot for somebody who had zero experience to be in. I got a lot of experience quick, and I had a lot of supervisors and other teachers who came alongside me and really taught me a lot. I'll be real honest. I leaned heavy early on. I leaned heavy into like how I'm in a spot where I might need to make a kid do something. I'm going to make you do something. I can make you do this. And so as I learned more, as I was there, I came across people who that was not their approach. Their approach was not to make somebody do something. And I took note of that. All right. And I looked at those people and I thought, there's one lady who was real great to me and was very influential. She was about 70 years old when she stopped teaching there just a couple years later, real small, maybe 100 pounds, 70-year-old lady, and very sweet. And she taught like a middle school emotionally disturbed room, and she couldn't make the kids do anything, and she got great results. And I thought, man, if she doesn't make them, I should not have to make them either. Like, what's she doing? And that's actually who I ended up getting doing my student teaching with. After about a year, I went back to school, started getting my master's in special education. Felt like I could do this and that there was a need for it. And so worked with her, ended up after that, went to another separate facility to teach for my first year of teaching, learned a lot more stuff there in my first year, came back to the original place I was at when an opening came, and worked there for, I don't know how many years. It was a lot of years teaching there. They gave me a great opportunity to kind of move into a different role after about 6 or 7 years of teaching, where I was a dean of students there. And I learned an enormous amount after having been in a classroom and being able to work with really just the toughest students in the area, the highest need students in the area that a lot of other people had given up on. I had that experience, and then was able to step back from that, not be in charge of a classroom, and be able to help adults. And I found like just a deep love for that, to be real honest with you. It was one of the 2 years I got to do that I loved. I really did. Not that I didn't love teaching or don't love teaching now, but I loved that because I realized that there are a lot of adults that needed a lot of help that are doing this work too. And I kind of found I had something to offer. I don't know what all that is or how to quantify that, but I found I had a little bit to offer in that area. And so I learned a lot now by being able to watch them after having had my own experiences. And I was working in every population, whether it was, multiple disability students or emotionally disturbed students, whatever, all across the board. And so I was learning a lot about a lot of different things. I was able to use that experience when I went back into a classroom after 2 years and worked about 4 or 5 more years. I can't really remember. And then somebody who I'd worked with before called me up and said that the district that he was in, he had left, and the district that he was in was going to have an opening. He had tried to get me to come there a couple other times, and he said, "Hey, actually, I'm leaving. It's for the behavior mental health unit." And I just last shot, I just figured I'd see if you'd be interested in interviewing. I said, I don't know, I don't know about that. And so I kind of waited, and a couple days later texted him back, and I said, yeah, I'd be interested, give him my name. And about a week later, found myself on a Zoom call with Katie and a handful of others, asking me what podcast I listened to. And I was like, I don't even know that I've ever listened to a podcast, And so, but I was able to talk about my experience there and what I was doing and what my belief was, for how you approach kids and what I'd learned. Again, working with Bruce Perry, it was interesting. This will be kind of an aside from how I got to where I'm at. And then all that to say, now I'm at where Katie's principal. We're working. I'm still in that unit now, 4th and 5th grade class of students, almost. I guess exclusively. Yeah, this is our 4th year. And then we have all of our students going out into gen ed rooms, not being sent out to separate facilities or anything like that. Not that those things don't maybe potentially have a place, I guess, but really trying to make sure that kids are in a spot that really is least restrictive, and what that means.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids that don't need to move to a more restrictive environment that do. And it's amazing what you can do with the right supports and the right approach. Yeah,
we see it time and time again.
Well, I think what you find is it's less about like where you have to move a kid to, right? And if you find out that what options you provide a kid, all of a sudden makes you not have to move a kid anywhere. Because if they have the right kinds of options, which sounds easy, right? It's easy for us to say right here. It can be hectic and hard to figure all those things out. I understand that. But if you provide the kids with the options that maybe they need, that maybe they hadn't been provided before, and then you let them know that it's okay to access those options. All of a sudden, I don't have to make a kid go anywhere because they have the options that they need. Right. And so it's just it's a minor shift. I think it's a minor shift in mindset sometimes that can help that out. What happened was at the separate facility I was at, they started the work with Bruce Perry. And I'm not like the most lovey-dovey, like affectionate looking teacher. I'm not, I really care about my kids. I do. And I'm in with them and really try to be supportive of them and try to help figure out how to help out. I think that sometimes this kind of work, trauma-informed care, there's almost a stereotype that gets thrown out there for people who would be bought in versus people who would not be. And the supervisor that I worked for at the time came to my room one day and said, "Hey, I already know the answer to this. we're doing this thing with Bruce Perry. It's about neuroscience and all this trauma informed care. You're the last teacher I've asked. I already know you don't want to do it, but I told him I'd ask everybody. And I said, absolutely, I'll do that. And I remember she looked at me, she was like, really? She was genuinely shocked. And I said, listen, I was like, there's a lot of stuff that I think I do that works.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea why it works. And I have a feeling that I will learn why some of it is working. And then I can actually do it on purpose instead of doing it on accident or thinking it works for the wrong reasons. I go, I also think that there's a lot of this that gets heard, a lot of this training that gets heard, and then it's misrepresented by people later.
Yeah.
And I go, I want to hear it firsthand. I was like, I need to get trained so I can listen and hear and understand, and that I can hopefully be able to say, well, whoa. Like what you're saying isn't exactly what I've heard is we're being trained in. Like, it's like what we've been trained in adjacent, but like, I don't think that that's actually the heart of it. And I was like, I need to know. And so, so I was excited to get to do it. And I think, I'm happy that everyone else passed on that.
So did you know Bruce Perry at that point? I mean, did you know who he was and what his work was?
He had partnered with the organization already. And so we had done some work with a couple of the books that he'd read and stuff like that I'd been able to read. And so I was generally aware, but I wasn't like delved in deep. No.
Like you weren't like starstruck like Bruce Perry. I mean, if you told me an opportunity today to go meet with Bruce Perry, go, woo, that's great.
Yeah, some people were like Katie, for example. She would have been starstruck, right? Like I was like, I don't know. I was like, to me, it's just I mean,
right.
I was like, hey, he's just some guy. Like, I don't know. He's like, doctor. I have no idea what he's doing. So I wanted to see what he was all about. But yeah, it was great. I mean, I think it did. It really helped me learn a lot more and to understand a lot better about what was happening. And I hope it helped me be able to help some of the people around me as I came back from those days of training and those Zoom calls and, all the hours we were putting in to be able to look at people and say, I know that you've kind of heard that this is what this means. I was like, and you seem like you're adamantly against it now. Like you're turned off to it. You're like, I'll never be trauma-informed care, whatever. I was like, I'm here to tell you that's not exactly how it is. And here's what I've heard. And here's how it already lines up with what you were doing. Maybe just make this little shift and we're right there. And I think it was, I like to believe at least it helped some people maybe re-buy in or give it a shot that weren't willing to give it a shot before.
Yep. So, Katie, so when you met, and of course, no podcast, you got to listen to some podcasts, right? No podcast, but mentions Bruce Perry, and I'm taking it that you had a pretty good idea at that point who Bruce Perry was. Have you been through Bruce Perry's training at that point, or have you subsequently been through the neurosequential training?
No, I had just read books. I had gone through Ross Green's Collaborative Practice Solutions advanced training at that point. I read a lot of books. I knew who Dr. Perry was. We ended up not interviewing anybody else, and I ended up waiting 6 weeks for Justin to tell me yes.
I'm a slow decision maker guy. I don't make decisions quick.
So, and then, it was interesting. He took the job, and then like 2 weeks later, the principal at the time that I was working with ended up taking a job somewhere else. He not knowing that probably less than a month later I was going to be hired on as the principal. So that was interesting how that all ended up playing out. And so we started together at the building at the same time.
Gotcha. So you started together at this building. You've been through, and what I really appreciate about your story, Katie, is kind of the connection between your kind of personal life with your own child, and what that journey led you to, and then what you learned, and then I'm sure that was kind of a light bulb moment as well about, these things that we're doing by practice. I mean, and you were doing some good things already, right? But some of the things that you were doing, like that probably presented as an opportunity to you, I would imagine, kind of based on what you were learning, to support your own child. Is that true?
Yeah, and it was interesting. I had some other colleagues, and I'll never forget this. John Mueller, who's retired, I sent him a text when I had Ross Green on the podcast. We were sending this guy a text and saying, he was like Ross Green's fan club promoter at the time. Like he was starting book clubs at our school, and I was like, I'm not reading that book right now or whatever. And I texted him, I said, who would ever thought I would end up here? And now I'm interviewing Ross Green, and it's all thanks to you. Because I had some colleagues that were really forward thinking in the building I was at. Was just dynamic in terms of professional development. really great group of educators that I've grown tremendously from. And going into that as a parent lens, people say you never know until, and I had kids later. I had taught a long time before I had my kids, and you just never really understand anything until you look through it as a parent's lens. Like there's no off time. I don't send them home. It's 24/7 work, right? And really gave me the lens of having grace for people and understanding just how difficult some of these family situations are. And people being on different pages, and my background's in education, my husband's was in business, and it just, I seemed like I was supposed to be the expert, right? I had worked with really difficult kids with special needs for a long time, and then you have your own kid and it rocks your world, and you're like, wait a second.
Right.
But yeah, it was tremendously helpful, and it really gave me the lens, looking through all the research, it's just why I was successful with a lot of different kids the way I was, knowing how the neuroscience kind of aligned with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think one of the strengths of, Dr. Green's work is really that lens shift, right? I mean, it's just looking through things differently. It's that idea that kids do well if they can, right? It's that idea of, this kid, if we give them what they need to be successful, will be successful. If we collaborate and work with rather than, kind of doing to, we're going to see a kid that's going to be able to be successful. And I think that lens change is so important, but it can be tough to make. There is a tremendous focus on, as everybody that watches the podcast knows, my least favorite word in the school setting, compliance. There's a tremendous focus on compliance often. And that focus on compliance often is, as you mentioned, Justin, it's like, because I told you so, I'm going to make you do it. And that unfortunately leads to a lot of negative kind of impacts and consequences. So I think that lens shift is so important. So you two then come together and you have this opportunity. This is at a new building that you're working at together?
Yeah, we both came on. There was a very veteran staff, and like I would say the teaching staff at our school is like absolutely out of this world amazing. Like they're so incredible, like people at the top of their game in the building. So we were very lucky walking into a staff that was more than ready and willing to kind of go down the road with us. Not that it was always easy or perfect, but we're absolutely ready and willing to learn, or at least hear us out on maybe some changes. We came on, this was the first year back from COVID. So
which was a tough year.
21, 22, people were starting to see all this behavior. Mental health was a big, as it still is, but really predominant, right? That school year, we're worried about people's mental health, teacher self-care. And we had the opportunity to come in, and I knew I wanted to make some changes. We had housed the behavior and mental health programs basically for the entire district for elementary in that building. And I knew I wanted to make some changes from being the coordinator there the year before with the program, which it really ended up being like more of a self-contained program. And I knew I really wanted to shift more to our trauma-informed approach. And I knew what this could be. And I was really lucky. Justin came on, and he's been a tremendous support system for me. And we just connected right away, like hit it off, and just really nerding out and said, hey, we should record this and do a podcast. Cause we were doing some staff meetings about educational law, adverse childhood experiences, the neuroscience, Dr. Ross Green's work in terms of lens shifts, restorative practices, a lot of tier 1 meetings. Did that for about 2 years. And people were starting to ask, hey, can you come talk to my staff? Or can you share some information? We were doing some district professional development. And so that's how kind of the idea of the podcast came around. Like we can only reach, our scope is pretty small, and there's such a need right now in the area. So we said, let's record this as like a training for people. So we could just play it on repeat. So we didn't have to, come do the same presentation every time. But so that's kind of where that sparked came off.
And actually, Katie had said, she was talking with somebody else about like, oh, we talked about doing a podcast. And I said, I would be a guest on a podcast. I was like, you evolved a little.
You evolved a little bit here from a what? A podcast? I don't listen to podcasts.
I was like, I'll sit down and talk to somebody. I was like, but I'm not going to do a podcast. So it took me a little bit to kind of get on board with that. Yeah. And when we came there, like Katie said, it was our unit, our behavior mental health unit that I'm in now still was more self-contained. And Katie, for better or worse, was like, hey, we want you to kind of make whatever shifts, like whatever shifts you think need to be made. And it had been being run a certain way for a while with people with great intentions who loved kids and were doing what they knew to be best from the training they had. And it was awkward going into, at this point, I'm 15, 16 years or whatever into working into schools. Realistically, it's only kind of the second place I've ever been. And now all of a sudden I'm looking at people who are like, this is how we do it. You need to do it this way. Who weren't my boss, but who had been running this. And I had to look at him and be like, that's not how I'm going to do it. And so, I'm not saying you can't do it that way, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way. And here's why. And it's hard. It can feel lonely at first, right? When you're someplace and you're trying to make shifts that maybe not everybody's on board with. And, but you try to do it. I tried to do it in a very caring, loving, like, I wasn't a jerk. I was like, I know better than you. Like it was like, I hear you. Here's my reasons why. And I think if we let it play out, I think we're going to see this is maybe the right path to go. And so, but then you're really putting a lot of pressure on yourself that like this is going to play out and show that it's the right way to go.
Right. And people are unpredictable. Life is unpredictable. Yeah. Classrooms are unpredictable. But so both of you came in with some ideas in terms of coming in with kind of collaborative practice solutions and the neurosequential model. And it sounds like, Katie, from what you said, that you had a pretty receptive, hardworking team at the school. But change is hard. I mean, change is hard anytime you do it. Before I get into talking about that more, though, I want to back up, and just for our listeners, that it's easy for us to kind of very casually talk about collaborative practice solutions or the neurosequential model and assume everybody knows what we're talking about. Yeah. And I don't want to assume that. And what I'd love to do is, Justin, if you would tell me a little bit, just for people that may not be familiar with Dr. Perry's work, about kind of what the neurosequential model is and why it's something that can be helpful for education. Kind of a quick elevator pitch of, this is why, this is something that can really help people shift how they think about behavior, kids, etc. So you want to give me a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely. What Bruce Perry does a really great job of, I think, is explaining how the brain works. And that's really what this is. The whole point of everything that he does is explaining more how the brain works, and specifically how the brain works potentially in somebody's life who has had trauma or not had trauma, just who's in a tough moment, when things are going poorly, when things are going really well, like how does it work and why is it working that way? What it does, I think, ultimately, hopefully, is, and I think his hope is too, putting a lot of words in his mouth all of a sudden, but I think what his hope is too is, like, if you understand how it's working, then you start to understand that it's a little bit more than just a person who's looking at you and saying, I'm not going to do what you said, or that's looking at you and screaming, or that's taking a swing at you but all I did was try to get him to do this math test, right? It's explanations of why those things might be happening. And if you have those explanations as to why, all of a sudden it's a lot less personal, for one. Two, I think even maybe the more important part is you understand that your brain's no different. And as the adult trying to handle whatever situation comes your way, whether it's great, whether it's not great, your brain is also having reactions, right? And so what is the reaction that your brain's having? And what are the things you can do as well that put your brain and the student's brain in the best possible state to be able to handle the things throughout the day, like the given things? And he does a really great job of that. That's really what it's all about. And there's a lot of science that goes into it, but that's my elevator pitch of it.
No, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I always think about, people holding up their little, the neurosequential model. Yeah. But I mean, it really is. I mean, I happen to be a huge believer that when you begin to understand human behavior through the lens of the brain and the nervous system, you see behavior differently. Your own behavior as well as behavior of everyone else, right? But it does start with you, as you said. I mean, Perry is famous for saying things like, well, our behaviors are contagions, right? That if we're dysregulated, we're not going to help a child who's dysregulated. When we're there trying to force somebody to do something, they're probably going to be pushing back with some force there as well. It's a great, I think the neurosequential model for education, I think, is a great model to really inform people about, kind of how the brain works and what's beneath human behavior, and understanding the impact of trauma. And this is so critical for being able to not only support kids, but to be able to give yourself grace and understand your own behavior in that moment where you become dysregulated.
Yeah, I think that's his real strength, right? I mean, not that he's not great, and not that his work hasn't been great at a lot of other things as well, but I think like if there's something that's like a real strength, it's getting that kind of information out to people. And once you start understanding that kind of training, that kind of understanding, right? Oh, I think once you understand those things, again, and I say this a lot, probably too much, but once you understand those things, you can stop accidentally doing stuff right, and you can start doing stuff right
with intention, right?
Yeah, and that's again seems like a small thing, but like that is such an important thing to all of a sudden start purposefully doing stuff that is going to make a difference. That can be really small, and that's pretty crucial.
Yeah, and can I say too? I think a critical.
This is not, that question was not directed.
Well, I meant right now. So, I think a critical mistake a lot of districts do when they try to shift behavior, they forget to do the neuroscience. They don't forget, or they're not sure how to do the neuroscience piece. Yeah. So trying to get somebody to shift behavioral lens because research says, or like, because this is what we're doing now, if you don't really stop and teach people why the human body is doing what it's doing, it really does take the personal piece out of it and get people to really understand why we're in fight, flight, freeze, and we look at it in a different manner. I think when I've just seen that time and time again where people are skipping the neuroscience people and just going straight to the discipline reform, and then we're missing most of the staff joining us along. Yeah.
People start doing is they start assuming it's a fad. Schools are so good at being like, what's the next thing that we're going to do for 5 years?
Well, and there have been a lot of next things over the years, right?
Yeah. And so teachers, and understandably, get to a spot where they're like, if I don't like this math curriculum, if I just wait like 5 or 6 years, it'll be a new one. So it doesn't matter anymore. If I don't. And I think that's what people thought about this when all this work was initially coming out too. The problem with that mindset is when you don't have the science behind it, is that you don't realize that all of this research and science and shift is coming from the fact that for the first time, with accuracy, we're starting to be able to look inside the brain in real time as things are happening with technology. And so stuff that we thought maybe could have been right before, now we can see, holy cow, like people that have gone through this have this whole area of their brain shut off. Like what in the world? It's no longer like it's no longer like an approach, and it's now biological science, and we are able to understand that. And I think people didn't realize that, and a lot of people probably still don't realize that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and remind me, did you, Katie? I know you had done Dr. Lori's program. Did you both do Dr. Lori's program?
No,
I did not.
Yeah.
Okay, you did not. Okay, so and this is great. This is why you guys complement each other. You bring in kind of some different pieces of this. Dr. Lori, of course, is known for the Applied Educational Neuroscience program, which there's a lot of overlap there with Dr. Perry's work, of course, and a fantastic program. I've been a big advocate for that program for a long time, and one of the things that I think is really critical about that. People that go through the program. So to Justin's point, understanding that science is really important, but understanding how that science applies to you is really important. And Lori does such a good job with that. So I wonder if you might tell us, Katie, a little bit about the Applied Educational Neuroscience training that you did, because this is another important piece in probably you becoming you in terms of the work that you're doing. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience with kind of the Applied Educational Neuroscience?
Yeah, if anybody's looking for a year graduate certificate program that is manageable while you're working, it is like literally, I have a couple college degrees there afterwards, and this has been the best thing I've ever done. It is so workable as a working school administrator or a educator. Dr. Lori is like the real deal. I couldn't wait to get to class every week. So I encourage people. Cohort 10, right, is open for Dr. Lori. We'll do a little plug for her. Applied Educational Neuroscience, what I love about it, it took beyond the brain science of Dr. Perry and really focused a lot on the nervous system and how our bodies are telling us a lot of information. So she spent a lot of time looking at the nervous system and the polyvagal theory and how that impacts and gets kids really to start doing that forward interoception work to start learning how to begin regulating themselves. Co-regulation is a huge component of that program, understanding that really relational practices and co-regulation really are the foundations of behavior management when you're really looking at it. And then the most important part, I think, the unique lens that Dr. Lori has offered is the adult nervous system, which was often and always overlooked in schools. It was always the kid was the problem. It wasn't like, here's two nervous systems connecting, and here's how we went wrong in the situation. So she spends a great amount of time for you to getting to know yourself. And I think it helped us a lot coming onto the building, getting the staff there. We did some work on just people I learned a lot about myself, getting to know a lot about yourself, how, if you're hyperarousal or hypoarousal or we spent some time doing Enneagram numbers, or just really understanding how your triggers and your response and how your reactions actually impacting the greater environment. So that program is just fantastic, and an abundance of resources to go back out and to lead the work within your building.
It seems like I can't think of a conversation I've had with anybody that's been through the program who hasn't described it, and using these words. I don't mean this to be, kind of cheesy, but like life-changing, like, participating in that program, just life-changing in some way. I've had the good fortune for several years now. Lori invites me to speak for every cohort, and that's how I get to meet you, and I've got to meet a lot of other people doing that, which is always a privilege, because it's again, that event we did just recently. 3 of the speakers that presented actually were in cohorts of Dr. Lori, and I think that work is really having a lot of impact, and it's nice to see things like, kind of taking hold and changes happening. And, I know there's a lot of people that go through programs like that and still maybe feeling kind of alone at their school. Maybe they still haven't gotten people, kind of on board, and that can be tough as well. But I think getting more people out there advocating for these approaches, we're going to be heading in better directions. So I want to shift for a second, and I'm just going to share another hello here. This one actually coming from Australia. I happen to know from a user who is on here quite frequently. It's great to see you, Marion. Others, if you're watching live, feel free to tell us in the chat who you are, where you're from, or if you have a comment or question, you're welcome to put that in the chat as well. And Courtney, also behind the scenes, if you could share the link to the Applied Educational Neuroscience at Butler, that would be helpful. Would love to share that link also. But let me go in a slightly different direction for a second. One of the things that I know is near and dear to your heart is, and as you mentioned, kind of somewhat related to the reason you do the podcast that you both do now, is sharing some of this with people that may be administrators, people that are in situations where they have a lot of influence over their particular school, or even at a district level. And you shared with me, as we were talking earlier, about kind of there being a need for people. So talk to me a little bit about this work that you both have kind of embarked on. You both have kind of different journeys, but at the end, it comes down to something Justin said earlier. It's about helping people, right? It's about making a positive difference in the lives of the children that you're supporting, but it also makes a difference in the lives of the teachers and staff that you're supporting, and all that can make an administrator's life much better as well. So talk to me a little bit about how if I was an administrator right now, and we've got all these new initiatives that come around the bend every year. We've got a lot of concerns around behavior. What would you tell me? Where would you lead me? And I'll start with you, Justin, and then I'm going to come back to you. So Katie, that gives you a second to reflect here. But what are some of the things that you might say to me if I'm a school administrator? And we have a broad audience here. We have a lot of parents and caregivers. We have a lot of teachers and related professionals, but we have a lot of school administrators as well. So what would your pitch be to them in terms of, facing the challenges they're facing and moving into a trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned direction?
Well, I think one of the things we say a lot, whether it's to teachers or administrators, is that the time spent working on behavior, for lack of a better term, right, and working around that, there's going to be a lot of time spent on it. And what you have the power to do is you have the power to choose where that time gets spent. So you can either choose to spend that time kind of reacting and having a reaction to each moment that comes up, and constantly fighting against the maybe constant drip of whatever whatever student there is, or whatever struggle a classroom teacher's having day after day after day for a whole year. over the course of several years, depending on where a student or a teacher might be. Or you have the opportunity and the option of trying to figure out how to spend that same amount of time in a chunk at the beginning of things, and really understanding more of all of this kind of stuff that we've been talking about, and then figuring out how to implement it into your buildings. I think that all adults, one thing that I know for sure is that all adults, when there is a challenge in front of them in a school setting, all the adults in that school feel like all the eyes are on them. And that includes the administrators, right? So some tough situation comes up. If I'm the teacher in that room, I feel like everybody's watching me, even if maybe they're not, but I feel like they are. And I feel like I'm being judged, even if I'm not. And maybe I am, but even if I'm not. And I feel like I'm worried about what people think, about what that means about me. Am I good at my job? What are they thinking about me? Like, that's what happens. The administrators are in no different spot right now. Whatever big situation comes up now, it's an administrative issue, and they feel like all that staff is watching them and judging and figuring out what are they going to do? What are they going to do with this? How are they going to solve it? And it's not only an intimidating thing and an overwhelming thing, but it's a very isolating thing. And I think, personally, I think the more that we all learn this stuff together and understand the humanity, not just of the students, I think that's crucially important, but really understand the humanity of each other, and are kind of in this together, and work to solve these problems together, and work to solve and come up with solutions together, just like we do with the kids, right? Just like we're advocating that we do for the kids. We should be doing that same thing with the adults that are around us. And for working around as many adults as we do, teaching can feel very isolated, and you can feel very much on an island. And administrative roles, I guess I am not necessarily in one, but I'm sure Katie would say even more so at times, right? And so, one, I would say try to build your community around you. But two, like, if you never start, because so many people, like we said, maybe when we started, maybe it was before we started, so many people say, well, I don't have this training like maybe you and Katie have, so I can't do this. Well, here's the thing. Like, if you never start to get trained, like, then you also never will have the training. And so what we want to do so often is we want to know that we're going to do something completely right before we start. And that's not how this works. And so you got to just start. You got to start looking into it. You got to start delving into it. You're going to make a billion mistakes. I make so many mistakes all the time. And so the only thing is you have to try to be better. You try to learn more. You try to improve from it. And that's okay. Like, nobody's expecting you to be perfect, but you got to be able to start, and you got to understand, not only are you feeling like everybody's watching you, all the staff is thinking everybody's watching you. If you're a superintendent, you got to know that all of the principals feel like everybody's watching them, and you probably feel like everybody in the community is watching you, right? Like, you're all kind of in the same spot, just in slightly different ways. And we should be able to understand that about each other and kind of come together. I don't know. I felt like that was a little rambly, but I'm
no. I mean, you've got some good themes there, and I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, we frequently use the Maya Angelou quote of "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better."
Sure.
What's missing from that quote is being intentional about knowing better, right? You actually have to take that as an initiative to know better, and sometimes it means. I mean, I'm a big believer that reading one book can make a difference, right? You get yourself a copy of Mona Delahooke's Beyond Behaviors, and you're going to start seeing the world a little differently. You get Lori Desautel's Connections Over Compliance, you're going to see the world a little bit differently. You get Bruce Perry's, What Happened to You, you're going to see the world a little differently. And that's the start. And I realize that it's tough. If you're an educator, you may not always get the time and the resources you need to engage in all the professional development that you might, but even, get a book on Audible and listen to it on your way into the office or whatever it may be. And again, I mean, I want to see schools providing robust and necessary training, but anything you can do as a person, finding a podcast like the Re-Education of Schools podcast, that kind of thing can really make a difference. So small things and the necessity to, like, I agree with you. Take a step. If we all waited, there's many things in life I would not have done if I waited until I had the perfect plan. I probably wouldn't be married, probably wouldn't have children, probably wouldn't have started I can think of a list of things that probably would have never happened had I waited to say, let me wait till I figure it all out. So you've got to do that. So Katie, to you, what do you think, kind of in the role that you're in, what would you say to a school administrator, or how would you inspire them to kind of embark upon this work?
Yeah, I would say there's lots of resources out there that you do not have to go through a bunch of training or be in like this expert cohort. Do those things help Justin and I? Absolutely. Gives us some credibility, right? It gives us some background knowledge and those things. What I would say is first go find your support system, because it's going to be it is tough work changing people's minds about behavior. That is not easy. So you need to have your catch fall and people to nudge you and support you in those hard times. I also am a big proponent of putting intentional professional development plans together. If you have staff meetings twice a month, you are setting up a cohesive staff meeting series for the entire year. And there are frameworks like Bruce Perry's PBS videos that are out there. There are tons of resources on Revelations of Education that Dr. Lori has put out that you could put let's dab into one of these for the staff meeting. Let's give time and space to talk about that. I think that's the biggest component, is giving people time to have feelings about it and a safe circle to express those. We ask for anonymous feedback twice a year from the staff, and it's not always easy to read, right? But you have to get the feedback to understand where people are, to understand where to nudge next, or things to back off on a little bit, or maybe push forward a little bit more some places. You got to let conversation happen. So I would encourage people to put that intentional professional development plan. They can email us. I'm happy to give people some resources or some suggestions. Looking over state law, I think it's crazy how many maybe teachers that aren't aware actually what state laws are in place about confidentiality, or what actual restraint and seclusion is considered, or
Probably administrators too.
Yeah, right. Like, look into some of that, and don't feel bad spending time on behavior and SEL. I know you do have to balance it out with academics at times too, but if you're looking at the MTSS lens, it's behavior, SEL, and academics. 2/3 of it is a lot of the work that we're doing. And if that's not in play, what we know about the brain is nobody's going to learn any of the academics anyways.
Right.
So you've got to put some systems in place. And I would say I spend very little time dealing with behavior during the day in a school that has more significant needs than probably another school probably typically would have. And that's because there's good systems. Systems are so important to put in place. Be intentional with your professional development. Put the time in the front end, and then you'll get to the point where in the back end, you're not having to spend as much time doing the constant line out the office, burning and turning kids, putting those different systems in place. So that really, by the time things get to me, it's probably a lot more significant and pretty rare that I am having to engage with a student or family in that manner. So yeah, that's my advice. Like, just be intentional about it. If you talk about it one day and you don't talk about it again in 3 or 4 months, that's where the problem is, right? It's not that consistent thread of intentionality throughout the year.
I think sometimes too, sorry, Guy. I think sometimes too, like we're afraid, just like we're afraid to like process an event with a student after a tough moment, right? People are afraid, like, what if they get worked back up again? What if they get really upset again? And so we kind of avoid that. I think we do that same thing with the adults. I think there's every time there's parallels between how we interact with students and how we interact with adults. And I think it's because we're just interacting with people, right? But I think there are times that administrators potentially have people that have gone through a tough moment, like staff that have gone through a tough moment. And instead of going down and maybe having a conversation that might be uncomfortable or might feel like they're saying any number of things back at you as the administrator, we avoid it, or we might avoid it out of, I hate to say comfort, but maybe out of comfort, or, avoiding discomfort. And what we rob ourselves of is a chance at not only solving maybe a problem, but more than that, we rob ourselves out of a chance of connection with another person in those moments. And I think we have to not shy away from those tough kind of conversations that can build us closer together, even when they're really tough and something that we don't look forward to. And it may not always end in a hug and a big smile and like, we're best friends. Like, it may not end that way, but you know what? It still builds connection in a way that you can't do if you just avoid having.
Yeah. All good points. And I think one of the things that resonates with me a lot from what you were saying is these things should be universal. Meaning that collaboration. Yes, we should be collaborating with kids, but we should also be collaborating with our teachers and staff. We should collaborate with our families. Very often, it's it's a dictatorship in some of the realms, and okay, well, we'll collaborate over here. I mean, the same things that we believe, we need to bring into all the things that we're doing, right? It's not just a matter of, well, this is a good idea in this context. Collaborating is something that I think is beneficial to anybody that we happen to be, working with or supporting. I want to give you kind of maybe, I don't want to say a tougher question, but kind of really getting into, again, you kind of described that, you came in with some, I think some similar ideas, different background, but both kind of on a neuroscience trauma informed type of journey. And Katie, you said that you had a great team and people were pretty receptive. That's not always the case, right? We know when you try to kind of bring in changes or new ideas, you have a certain number of kind of resistors on one side. You have some people that are eager to jump on, and you have a lot of people in the middle, and they can swing depending on how things tend to go. And when it comes to even just the topic of behavior, when you begin to look through that kind of trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned approach, you look at behavior differently. You respond to behavior differently. You focus on things like co-regulation. It's a different approach, but people are sometimes very tied to the way they have traditionally done things. So they're tied to compliance. They're tied to consequences. They're tied to, and when I say consequences, I mean punitive adult consequences typically. And especially for a leader, when you're trying to bring in change like this, and people are like, well, Jimmy went to the office and just got to co-regulate, they may not be satisfied or feel like, you're really doing the things that are supporting them. So did you have, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but, how do you recommend for people to respond in those situations? What are the things that you can do to help people to begin to see this differently? And of course, having that core knowledge, that's essential, right? That's really critical. But just as people might be beginning to like, well, so-and-so got in trouble and he got to go down and hang out with, Miss Thornton. And, how do you work with getting people on board and understanding the impact of all of this?
Yeah. And if we were like super transparent, yes, we had that for sure. Right. Like that was part of the years as we worked through that. I say every year, I think more and more people became on board, or we had some staff changes and those kind of things. And so I don't want to act like everything we've had some hard conversations and times that we've had to go through those things. I always try to be really respectful of our staff and not overshare too.
Yep.
And to that point, I think one of the things that has been helpful, and from my perspective, is that you can have a really great staff who are made up of really great people, and they still may disagree with you adamantly. That doesn't make them a bad person, right? Like it doesn't make them. And I think that's important, because there was disagreement, or there was pushback for sure.
Yeah. And I would say my personality type, I'm an Enneagram 3. And so I am a fixer. I'm going to problem solve that. You're telling me something and I'm already thinking how I'm going to fix it for you. It's just how I operate. And I would say Justin's very good at just telling me, sometimes you just need to be quiet and just listen. And that you don't need to solve this right now.
What if you shut up for a minute?
And just listen? And so you have to surround yourself with people that are very different personality types than you, that can give you the honest feedback that you trust explicitly. And that was really helpful. I had to really learn the hard lesson that sometimes it was just sitting and listening is what somebody needed. They didn't need me to fix it. They needed me to listen and felt heard. I have improved and changed many of my practices and the way I relate and communicate with people. I came on as a brand new principal. I had not principaled somewhere else. It was like my first, I was, bright eyed. I was like, we're going to change the world. And I mean, I really feel like it's really been great, but, I came up with these big ideas. And so there was a lot of communications and systems and trying to work with people and developing all those things. And I think being heard, I think I continuously kept it going back to research in the law, like knowing that really well helped and served me well. Here, I hear you, but here's why we can't do that any longer. It's actually because of this and that. This is why we have to do this differently. It's not that they're getting away with whatever. They are consequences. So we spend a lot of time on restorative practices and natural consequences that Dr. Russ Green talks about. There are consequences and they need to be logical and not systematic, right? So going through a lot of those change in systems took time and listening to people and developing a lot of subcommittees and teams and going through a lot of that work.
I think it's still and still right, as no matter how often you work with people and no matter how far anybody gets, there are plenty of times that I think I'm doing something right still now, and then I step back and I'm like, actually, that was super unfair, maybe to that classroom teacher. Like that wasn't fair. Like that wasn't a fair response, or that wasn't a fair, position to put them in when I in that moment thought it was. And that I think it's important is to when you come up against those situations when you're like, hey, we did try something, we did implement something, or we didn't go the way we used to go, and that everybody maybe wanted us to go. We didn't have that kind of reaction, but the reaction we did have also didn't cut it. Like it also wasn't right. That doesn't mean that the direction we were going was wrong. It just meant we're not quite there yet. Like we still had other stuff to figure out.
Right.
And I think there's been years worth, and I'm sure there'll still be more years worth of figuring stuff out, like on Katie's end for the whole building, on my end for the unit that I'm working in. There's always going to be something else that's new that you kind of got to figure out that maybe you didn't do right, even though you had good intentions, you were moving the right direction, you thought, but turns out we aren't quite there yet. I think what's important is when you come into those moments, not to just give up and jump back to whatever it used to be 4 years ago or 2 years ago. Right. And I think that's what we see sometimes is like a panic move of like this didn't work and somebody's mad at me. And so now as an administrator, whoever, now I'm going to go back to, well, now you're just in trouble, consequence, punitive, whatever, because I don't know what else to do. And it really is almost a panic move over okay, let's slow ourselves down.
Right.
Just because we didn't get it right this time doesn't mean we're not moving the right way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to offer yourself that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, that's one of those things I lose sleep over is that, when things become more challenging, people will sometimes go down a known pathway, even if they know it's not working. When we are under stress, of course, our thinking, logical, rational brain also kind of goes offline a bit. And, so that's where you see, oh, well, we need more suspensions or expulsions. It doesn't matter what the data shows us. These things about these things, so there always is that fear and threat, that is concerning because things can very quickly continue in a bad direction.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you keep it going back to the heart of why are we here? We're here to help kids, and how is this going to help this child, right? And I think majority of educators are in it for the right reasons.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
going back to, we just want to help the kid. So we're suspending him for 3 days. What's the plan when we come back? How is that going to actually help him? Is that really the right move? Talking through all those things. If our heart's to help and be with kids.
So I got a couple more questions as we get to the end here. One is, and this is for both of you, so I'll let you take it in turn here. Anything right now that you're training you're doing, or things you're reading, or podcasts you're listening to, and Justin, I don't know if those are still when you're listening. But I'm curious, like, what kind of things are you consuming right now? What kind of things are you finding helpful in your own continuing journey along this road?
I continue to just try to find, I really lean heavy into like non-educational stuff for whatever reason. And I tend to lean towards like people kind of things. Like, what is it that people seem to be universal things? Cause like we've been talking about so far all afternoon, right? Like that ends up translating, if I think about it very long, into how I work with my students, but also translates into how I work with all the staff around me. That are my peers, I lean into that kind of stuff a lot, whether it's like kind of leadership-y books or, things that are about human nature. I think I tend to go towards those more than anything else. And I'm quick to find random articles. We were just talking, I found out separately to somebody today about an article that we had read. We did one of our podcast episodes on a little while back. Like on prevalence-induced concept change, right? And so the article had nothing to do with education, but man, when I read it, I was like, this is 100%, like this is what we're up against, like so many times. And so like I love being able to like pull stuff that isn't necessarily from the education world and see how I can apply it. So I'm kind
of
of all over the place. I'm all over the map a little bit at times, with whatever happens to grab my interest. Right now, yeah, I've been reading a couple things more about community. There's, again, like a John Mark Comer book I referenced not too long ago when we were talking with
Character Strong.
Yeah, Character Strong. Thanks. I also forget names a lot, so that's why I look to Katie.
All the time.
It's constant. It's constant. And so, like, I've been reading a book about that. It has nothing to do with education, but it has to do with community and how we interact with one another. And I think as I read through that, I'm like, how does this apply to my everyday? How does this apply to the kids in my room? How does this apply to the 4th and 5th grade teams I'm working with?
Right.
What can I do better about that? It's things like that I think that are kind of universal that I tend to lean towards.
Gotcha. Katie, anything you've been doing, reading?
She's deep into education world.
I do. Sometimes you like just read a regular book. Sometimes like enough. I'm reading The Schools We Need right now. Is a book that Corwin had published, and it's just kind of going through like MTSS, mental health systems, those kind of things. So professionally, I'm kind of reading that right now. Our staff is doing a podcast PLC series right now. We're using Cult of a Pedagogy, Jennifer Gonzalez's work. She has a lot of guests. She's guest on and talks about different concepts. So some of them are academic based. We're getting ready to listen to one by Graham Fletcher on math progressions, but then some of them we're going to do Unconditional Positive Regard will be one of the episodes we're going to do and talk about that. So sometimes they're SEL based. So I've been listening. I love her podcast. I think they're very good and informative. Really, we just did one on rubrics. And then continuing to, anytime Dr. Lori's on something, I try to listen because she always has new latest research out to try to tap into that just to stay, abreast of all that. So that's kind of, and I've been listening to, I've been following a pastor, actually. His name's Philip Anthony Mitchell, and I listen to him pretty much every day. He's a pretty dynamic public speaker, and try to make that an intentional point, but it's kind of where I'm at in a lot of children's books.
I hear you. I still have my favorites, and I reference them every once in a while, and people look at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
All right, so we're about at the end of our time here. If anybody has any final thoughts or questions, you're welcome to put those in the chat. But as we wrap up, I'm gonna kind of throw a question at each of you, and we will wrap up here shortly. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges right now out there in education. There's a lot of challenges in the world. I mean, quite frankly, it's a lot going on outside, and these are tough times, and if anything, more and more we need people that are advocating, for the kinds of approaches that you're advocating for, and we need people that understand, brain science and trauma and all of these things. So my question for you as we wrap up, tell me what makes you feel hopeful these days. When you look at education, what makes you feel hopeful? What are some of the things that you think are kind of leading to better outcomes for anyone involved here, whether it's a teacher or an administrator or a child or a family? So tell me what gives you hope right now, and let's see, where do we start? Katie, I'm going to start with you. We'll give Justin
this is tradition, just not intentionally going, but we only do public speaking together, so I always make him close it every time.
I've been public speaking by myself for a long time.
Well,
did you not know that?
No, this is so weird. So I always make him. I'm like, you have to close it. He's so good at it. So, anyways,
pressure's never been higher.
I know, right? So I think what gives me tremendous hope is I am so incredibly proud of our school, the high level of needs of kids that have been supported. I am so proud of our teachers. We just looked at academic data that is absolutely incredible. You would look at our building needs profile and say there's no way that school is performing that well. And it's all to our teaching staff. Like, I am so incredibly proud. I would say you could interview each one of them and have like a wonderful story and a heartfelt love for kids. It gives me so much hope that it can be done. When I see other schools struggling and other districts struggling and other places struggling, I have found the most amazing group of people that I absolutely just love. We have a most incredible family community. The kids are supporting, embracing, co-regulating with each other, having restorative conversations. I've just seen a wonderful model of what can work in a school. And it gives me a lot of hope for the future. And I purposely intentionally send my own children there because I just think it is so great. The things that are happening in each one of those classrooms, academically, social, emotionally, behaviorally, collaboratively, always child-centered and focused. And that is hats off to the team that we work with. That gives me a lot of hope that this can be done in schools.
That's great. And we'll have to, let's see about getting a couple of those teachers on the podcast.
I would love that. That would be
that'd
super
be fun.
fun. I would love for some of them to do that. And if I can get, yes, I will, we will have to do that sometime.
It's important to share the success stories, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's no shortage of hearing about all the horrible things and all the challenges that are out there. And it's really important to share those stories. So, I mean, I say that very openly. If you have educators that are interested in sharing their story and sharing their journey, whether they want to write an article or talk on the podcast, getting those stories out there in the world, it's important, because if others can find them, it can sometimes provide that entryway into a door and help them. All right. So Justin, there's enormous pressure here. I've been told that you are going to end this in a way like no other podcast has been in.
Life-changing.
That's right.
That's what
but you need to give me your intro first. What's your intro for your podcast?
I usually say, welcome to our next episode. It's going to be whatever the title is, and then I try to get people to like and subscribe, and then I say the title again.
Don't say that. I always forget, and then Courtney yells at me later. We need people to follow us on YouTube and like and subscribe. So
helps get the word out there, right?
There you go. All right. So now there we go. We have on the bottom now our subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Courtney.
She's got you covered.
That's right. All right. So now, what about you? What gives you hope?
Well, I think in general, there's a quote. I think it's and I'm sure it's not just from this movie. So there's probably from a real person, and then the movie quoted it. But so I'm going to sound potentially dumb here, but there's a quote in Men in Black, right? Which is, I think it's Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones. They're sitting down towards the end, and Tommy Lee Jones says something about how people as a whole, aren't really great, right? But a person can be good. And I think that's sometimes what we get ourselves. We fall into that trap where we think there's huge groups of people and we want to lump them in to things, whether it's one side versus the other, whether it's that group down the hall in a school, whether it's some group politically, however you want to dice it, right? That it's somehow they're awful. And I think what gives me hope and what is encouraging to me is that I have consistently found, if you get to know a person, if you take the time to get to know a person, if that's a person down the hall in your school that you thought you weren't a huge fan of, you thought maybe they weren't a huge fan of you, if it's a person in your neighborhood that you're like, golly, they just irk me and I think they hate me, I'm going to go get to know them. I'm going to actually give them a chance. I'm going to learn more of their story, find out who they are, whether it's a student in my room, a family of a student in my room, a mom, a dad, caregiver of some sort. If I take the time to get to know them and I get the time to be vulnerable, or take the time to be vulnerable enough myself to let them know me with a high level of consistency, man, people are good and people want to come through for you. And you find out that all of us are up against something any given day, and we can actually be there for each other instead of just judging each other from a distance. Right. But we have to get to know each other. And when you do, my gosh, that there's nothing but hopefulness in that, right? Because even some of the people who have some of the worst actions at times, you find out that there's a lot of reasons behind that. And maybe I can be a light to them today. Maybe tomorrow they'll be the one that's being a light to me. And I think that's important. And people come through, man. But you got to give them a chance, and you got to be vulnerable enough to let yourself be known.
Those are wise words and important words. And I think, reflecting on kind of where we are right now as a nation, there's a lot of division, but at its core, we share a lot more in common than we have apart. Absolutely. And, I absolutely agree with you. When you get to know some people, we look at people through a different lens when we have a relationship. Two people can have the exact same action, and if you're connected to one of them, you will see the action differently. I mean, it's innate in who we are that those relationships connect us. This has been a great conversation. We could probably go on for another hour or two and talk more, but I really appreciate both of you, both in terms of the work that you're doing, your journey. Want to remind people to make sure they check out your podcasts, the the Re-Education of Schools podcast, which is fantastic. And I know you've got a lot of great guests that you've had on that show, and continue to have a lot of great guests, a lot of good conversations and important conversations. So thank you both for being here today. It's been a lot of fun as always. And I knew it would be. It's like, it's always fun to look and go, okay, what's coming up this week? And it's like, oh, we're going to have fun. So,
Yeah.
And I always tell people that, and some people actually, I mean, you guys now are doing this, so, you're familiar with it, but some people are like, I was really feeling kind of anxious about it. Oh, no, it's just gonna be fun. We're just gonna
it'll be good.
Talk.
Yeah.
People will be watching too, but who cares?
Yeah.
Anyway, with that, again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank our audience for being here. We're going to let everybody go. I'd ask you two to stick around for a minute, just so I can give you one more thank you behind the scenes. And again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you again next time. And thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.